The storyteller sets the vision, the values, and the agenda for an entire generation yet to come. Let me run that by you again. For an entire generation yet to come. It's not about you. It's about something much bigger than you. Our life and our businesses are nothing more or less than our reaction to the moments in our life. I'm hoping that today, wherever you are, wherever you're listening to this, is one of those moments that actually moves the needle in some way, shape, or form.
Welcome back to our class. It's the guide. Please take a seat. Step into this unique guidance session. Navigate with me. Yeah, Janitor Scott coming to you live from the closet with a bucket and a mop. So find a cozy spot. We all want financial freedom. ACCOUNTINGHIGH. Preach. Putting this course together. Sit back, relax, open your mind. Classes in session. Guidance class at Accounting High.
Introducing the star of our show,
Paul Dunn.
We're gonna have a problem here.
Oh, students, you are in for a treat today. I have Principal Ron Baker's co-author here. I don't know what role you have yet, Mr. Paul Dunn, at the school, but you may have a faculty role here at Accounting High in the near future. We'll see. Paul is an author, as you may know. He's also done a lot of things in the profession, won lots of awards, has been with us in the accounting profession for well over 30 years, probably more, coming to us from Brisbane, Australia, in the eye of a hurricane. First time they've ever had a cyclone in 54 years, and he's here with me talking in the eye of it. Paul, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I really am doing well, Scott. And thank you so much in a weird way, I feel safer after that introduction. That is just the coolest thing. That's what people have said about you to me, that this is a very special place. And so I'm very, very delighted to be in Accounting High this morning. And maybe I get invited to stay. So that would be great.
We're happy to have you. For a little context, your most recent book with Ron Baker is Time's Up. Ron's
Yeah.
been kind of touring with that book. I believe you have as well. I read
Yeah.
it. You two both have written together before. Firm of the Future.
That's right.
Right.
Time of the future, way back.
I think we're in the future right now. Is it fair to say that we're in it?
Never looked more like it, has it?
Has it?
And there's that lovely thing about it, right? Everybody thinks it's all moving too fast, but then we realize that today it's never going to be slower than today, right? So it is a very
It's
exciting
never
time.
going to be slower than today. Let's pull that thread a little bit more too, because it is happening really fast. We're in the thick of the AI cyclone as well.
Yes.
We're all feeling the backdraft of all the AI talk. And I think we're still in the early stages of that, just like we were the early stages of the internet. And you
Uh,
saw the early stages of the internet. You've seen all
I
of
was
this
there.
come and go. Today, I want our discussion to talk about purpose and legacy. And
Mm.
this was, as mentioned by Ron. Ron had recommended that we have you on the show, and I listened to our principal, and I know you guys have written books together. Why would he suggest that we talk about that, Paul? Why would he consider you an expert in those topics of discussion?
Well, Ron and I go back to 1996. I was at the an event hosted by the Californian CPA, and I was one ramping up and down the stage and very passionately talking about time and all of that sort of stuff and how we measure the wrong things. And everybody in the audience is like, and there's one guy who's going like
Ron was
this, and that
getting it.
was
He got it. What
that was
year was
Ron.
this?
And Ron came up afterwards and he said, "Oh my God, that was really something else." And he said, "By the way, can I? People don't introduce themselves like this very often." He says, "By the way, can I tell you what I want on my tombstone?" No one has ever said that to me when they introduce themselves. And he said, I wanted to say, this man killed the billable hour. Since then, we've been incredible friends. I don't think anyone has a mind like Ron, and he's amazing. And so it's my privilege to consider him a longtime friend and to work together and to write books together and to respond to requests that he makes, which says, you've got to go and see Scott. So there you go. But to get back to your question about purpose, it really is the driving force. We tend to think, don't we, that the tools are the driving force, this new thing, whatever it is the driving force. But the reality is it's you sitting listening to us right now. It's you that's the driving force. And driving forces always have somewhere where they're going, right? And that's not the same as today. And so getting on purpose, and I go beyond that. There's a lot of stuff written about being purpose driven and finding the North Star and all of that kind of stuff, which is absolutely right, absolutely right. But I think there's a way we can go beyond that and become impact driven. And the difference is very simple. You can write a whole string of words, so our mission is, whatever that mission is. And typically, what firms do is they have retreats. I wish they would call them forwards, but they persist in calling them retreats. And they
Meaning
come up
retreat
with
is
these.
going backwards and forwards is forwards, right?
You got it.
It never even occurred to me. Yeah,
It's well, there's so many things that are in front of us that never even occurred to, and hopefully, being here in Accounting High today, that may happen a few times. And so we write this string of words, and we normally do it by committee and all of that kind of stuff. So the string of words, which ideally should be like 5 or 6 words, ends up being, several paragraphs. And of course, no one remembers that. So what we then do is stick it up in the toilets in the hope that people will read this, and they don't. So they don't get on purpose. And it's really interesting what that does. I mean, you would know the company called Gallup, for example, that do a lot of studies. And they continually do the study about team engagement or employee engagement, most people call it. I prefer to call it team engagement, but in any event. And the numbers are just amazing, Scott. They are. So if you imagine, and to make it easy, let's just imagine a firm of 100 people. By the way, that doesn't mean you have to have 100 people. That just makes it easier for percentages, right? So there's 100 people in this firm, and they're in a boat, and the boat is heading that way. Okay? And you're at the tiller of the boat guiding it. So you're facing that way. Everybody else has got they're looking at you and they've got their back to where they're going, right? And the numbers are absolutely mind-blowing. It says this, the latest number says 26 of that 100, 26% are rowing the right way, right? They're rowing the right way.
the right way.
65%, an incredible number, have their oars in the water. Right, they're just kind of dangling there. They're turning up at 9, going home at 5, that sort of thing. And because we're all accountants, we can figure out what the missing 12 is, or it's 12 anyway. And have a guess what they're doing? They're actually rowing the other way. Okay, and their
Opposite way.
audience becomes the 65 who've got the dangling oars. And it's in fact, Gallup did some numbers on what does that level of disengagement, what does that say numerically? And they reckon 212 billion, with a B, right, $1 billion lost in productivity alone, just from that. Now, where does that come from? And it comes from, basically only 23% know which way we're actually going. So when you get on purpose, you flip that around and the team engagement becomes massive. And as a result of the team engagement becoming massive, guess what? More people are stepping up, more people are becoming accountable, more people are stretching themselves, and you, the firm owner, right, are able to run the firm, not be the firm. And it just makes a significant, it's a significant difference. Well, try 212 billion as a number. Let me give you the English teacher at the high school, by the way. They're very good at this thing. They're called alliteration, right? Alliteration, as you know, is, putting together a string of words which tend to begin with the same sound. And so the way that I would describe this, and hopefully those of you joining us now would get this. So what this is all about is moving from standard, meaning like everybody else in the sea of sameness, from standard to stand out because you stand for something
Ooh.
bigger than yourself. Let's go through that again. You go from standard to stand out because you stand for something bigger than yourself. And
So the
and and
standard is
when
going along. What's the standard then? Let's go
well, the
start from
standard
the
is,
beginning.
like everybody else, right? Like
Just
everybody
like
else.
everybody else.
Yeah.
Then you become different, so you stand out.
You
But
stand
it's not just
out.
standing out. You have to stand for something, a
And that
larger
something is
purpose.
exactly, and that something is bigger than yourself. And think about what that does, without worrying what it is for the moment, but think about what it does. What so many firms do is they believe it's all about, having their CRM and all of that kind of stuff, and getting leads, and that's which to some extent it is. But what if instead of you having to go out and find it, what if you were standing for something so much bigger than yourself so that you became attractive to people, and all of a sudden you move from chasing to choosing, if that makes
Mm.
sense. And so when you move from chasing to choosing, Ron says that the biggest issue in terms of profitability is your client mix, the clients that you have and probably shouldn't have. But we're still chasing, right? But we're still chasing maybe the wrong people. But when we
We're
stand
chasing the
for,
dollar.
yeah, exactly, when you stand for something bigger than yourself, that's of course the purpose thing. Then
So
things significantly change.
so I think that whet our appetite for purpose. I want to now get more specific. So we've talked really big here. Now let's talk about how you got into this profession of accounting and why this has become your purpose, because I feel like your bigger purpose is you're evangelical and you're speaking for the profession, and we fast forwarded to when Ron saw you on stage, but how did you get on that stage?
Yeah, yeah. And that's because I was working with a lot of SMEs, or SMBs as we sometimes call them in the US, meaning small to medium scale businesses. That's what I was doing. And I was helping them run, even better businesses. And one day, another friend of ours, a guy called Rick Payne, was sitting in an audience of SMEs or Bs. And
Rick
I
who?
was Rick Payne, as in
Okay.
Payne, right?
Mhm.
And anyway, so I was doing this thing for all of the SMEs, and then Rick came up to me, and I will modify the language slightly in a break, and he said, "You're stupid." There was an adjective in the middle of that, but and I said, "Really, why?" And he said, "Well, you're giving all of these people in the room such great skills, but they can't leverage it. They can't leverage it. It's just for them. The dry cleaner sitting there can use the skills for the dry cleaner. But I'm an accountant," he said. And I had done some work with his firm. And he said, so it suddenly hit me that, here am I with all of these clients, and I can leverage that. And that was one of those defining moments. And I went away, and within 24 hours, I had created a thing which was called the Accountants Bootcamp. And the Accountants Bootcamp had
Ah.
never been seen before. It was kind of a weird place. People would come and invest in those early days, even $6,000 to be with us for 4 days. It was an incredible, full-on 4 days where we had the privilege of working with 17,700 firms over the period. And Ron, I met Ron at the beginning of that journey, and ever since we've been very firm friends.
Within 24 hours, what was your thesis and what was fueling you for that 24 hours that you created that course?
There's a very, very simple line, and the line was that the accountants are reporting on history, right? But what if you flip that and you said, this is not about reporting on history, this is helping our selected clients create history? What if you got that shift? And all of a sudden, when you get that shift from moving from "we're here to report," by the way, you've obviously got to do that, right? And just he goes, somebody, oh, here we go, we get off on the CAS bandwagon. No, we're not off on the CAS bandwagon, because there's all sorts of things you can advise your clients about. But in any event, or your customers, as Ron prefers to call them. So again, think of the shift from reporting on history. Here's the spreadsheet kind of thing. Here's the results, that sort of thing. And I'll put it. Some people still say, I'll fax them to you. I mean, that's. We used to joke that one of the most famous business decisions or courageous business decisions was the first guy to get a fax machine. I mean, who the hell are you going to talk to, right? So in any event, once you make that shift, it's a crucial shift. Right? And again, by the way, that flips into the purpose, so this will all come together, right? Then what you're doing is you're moving from, and this is such an important shift in the shift, if that makes sense. So it is this. So let's go through it again. Standard to stand out because you stand for. Another way of thinking about that is we move from reporting on history to helping our selected clients. Notice that, not every client. Our selected clients create history. And the moment we make that shift, we fundamentally are concerned with something different, which is we are concerned with outcomes. Outcomes, not
The future.
inputs. Exactly. What we've got to get is that so I was at a session just a couple of days ago, and we were talking about this, and we're working really hard to get that your income, that is to say, the accounting firm's income, depends upon the client's outcomes. Right? That's so obvious. It's so obvious when you think about that. So, guess what our purpose has to be? Our purpose has to be something about outcomes, not the inputs. And we're measuring, many times we're measuring the wrong things. We should be measuring the outcomes. That's what brings people back. That's what keeps people coming back to you. And by the way, that's what gives them and their family and your family an infinitely better life as well.
So that's part of your founding message for your newer company, the B1G1, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Business for good. And what you're measuring is the impact you're having on the world with that
Yes,
company. Can you
exactly.
care to explain
100%.
that or dive a little bit deeper?
Sure. And that comes from something that happened in 2007. And perhaps I could just back up a little bit and say that someone once said to me, and this is so true, someone once said to me that our life and our businesses are nothing more or less than our reaction to the moments in our life. Right? And I'm hoping, as I'm sure you are, because you wouldn't do this unless there was a bigger purpose, right? I'm hoping that today, wherever you are, wherever you're listening to this, is one of those moments that actually moves the needle in some way, shape, or form. And so in 2007, here I am with this tiny little Japanese lady, and I'm mentoring her. She had a tiny little food company, which was ahead of its time. It was making gluten-free frozen food as a takeaway delivery service, right? Before we understood what takeaway delivery services were. And anyway, so we're sitting in this room filled with books so that I look like a good mentor, right? And she says in this lovely Japanese voice, "Can we do different today?" And I say, "Well, what do you have in mind?" And she said, "Well, you're the mentor. You're the one who asks the questions. By the way, that's a crucial point. We all should be the ones doing that. So you're the one that asks the question. So can we change it around? And can I ask the questions up front?" So I said, "Well, it sounds like a good plan. Go for it." So she said, "Well, the first question is a what if question." And she said, I'm pausing not for effect, but pausing because I've got a lump in my throat thinking about the implication of this. She said, "What if we could create something whereby every time business was done, or every time something good happened in business, something great happened in our world. And I went, oh my God, that would be pretty game changing if that happened. And then there's a whole story about how that kind of happened from there on in. And so now you have accounting firms, one very close to me as we speak, actually, where every time something happens on the customer journey, whatever that customer journey is, so, it could be someone visited on the website. It could be we had a great meeting. It could be we did some stuff, some forward planning, whatever it is on that customer journey, something great happens in the world. For example, it could be something like this. We just had a great meeting, and as a direct result, 6 kids just got access to game-changing education. And what B1G1 does, by the way, is it makes that whole process really, really easy and so on. And so what ends up happening, so think about this whole purpose thing. What ends up happening the moment you do that, you've got something measurable that is not just, we're doing good stuff, right? It's like, because you can actually measure the impact, you can measure where they are and all of that sort of stuff.
You can feel the impact, and that goes to a greater purpose, bigger than you're lining your pockets.
Yeah.
Bigger than just making money, bigger than just commerce. You're changing lives by doing that.
100%. And I was doing a session at a place called the Sunshine Coast, which is currently getting battered by the cyclone, just a little north of here. And I called the session, my opening slide was, how great it is to be in front of a group of heroes. And these are accountants I'm talking to, right? A group of heroes. And then the subtext on that was, who don't understand that that's what they are. And they don't. It's like, the classic thing, right? Where someone, you're at some sort of meeting or something, it could be a dinner, whatever it is, and someone comes up to you and they say, oh, good evening, great to see you. What do you do? And you say, oh, I'm an accountant. Have you ever noticed the person says, oh, I'm just dying to go to the toilet. I'll be back.
The world is beating us down. The world is beating accountants down, just like the storm is beating down your neighbor. The world is beating us down. We're the butt of every joke. Nobody likes accountants. They make fun of us in movies and everywhere.
But imagine, but see, how simple is that to change, right?
It's perception.
Well, but also in the words, right? You can, so, good evening, great to be here. Good to see you at the event. What is it that you do? And, well, thank you so much for asking. What I do is I help small to medium scale business owners change their lives and run fantastic businesses. That's what I do. Oh, really? How do you do that? And this is such an important point. People think that it's all about doing something big. You've got to, get in there and do something big. How big is it to be able to change the words, right? Oh, I'm an accountant, to, well, actually, I run a business that helps other businesses create amazing businesses, right? Oh, really? Can I be a part of that? I'm willing to hold on to the fact that I want to go to the toilet just to,
Can I hear more?
Exactly. And that's it. We sometimes think of change as being, some sort of dramatic thing. And it can be, obviously, it can be. But so much better to be able to think of change as these tiny little power, I call them the power of small things that actually make a major difference. And, there's so much work been done on that. If you think about James Clear and Atomic Habits, for example, talking about the 1% difference every day. Mm-hmm. And since we're good with numbers, it's pretty easy to figure out, well, if you were 1% different or better every day, what would happen at the end of 365 days? The answer is you would be 37.8 times, not percent, times better at that particular skill. If you just did the 1% thing. So it is all about it's not all about, but it's partly about those tiny little things that make amazing differences that we sometimes forget. I'll give you a very simple example. Obviously, I spend a lot of my time like this, sort of talking with people on Zoom or Teams or whatever it is. And sometimes they've obviously gotten into my calendar and they've made a time, and I use very different times. I tend not to use the o'clock, the 30 or whatever. I will use like 10:10, something like that, or 10:20, or 10:40, or 10:50. And the reason is that, we don't think about 10 o'clock anymore, or we don't think about 9 o'clock. We go, it's approximately then. So what happens is we get to places approximately at that time, which is usually after. And so here I was on a call yesterday, actually, and they came on right on time, right on time.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, it's Sally, it's really, really great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. And by the way, can I just congratulate you for being on time? And I mean, that was a great start to what became
showing
a
up
great
on
thing.
time is setting the bar very low.
yeah, but you know what I'm saying, right? You know what I'm saying.
No, and it's hard for people to show up on time too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and you appreciating that and setting the tone from the beginning leads to a better meeting too.
Yeah, exactly. And so it is it's a collection, if you like, of these very tiny little things. It comes across in. I mean, think about for the moment. I mean, just think about something else that accountants do. They do things called proposals sometimes, right? And as you know, there's all sorts of software that enables you to do that. But if you think of the typical proposal, and by the way, I don't think you should ever call them proposals. You should never be saying, here's a proposal. You should be saying, here's the plan. Just change the word, right? Here's the plan, right? And all of a sudden it flips, right? But think about what the typical thing is. Right? The typical thing is, we're going to do this and 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 this. We're going to do all this, and it's going to cost you this, right? Now, that ignores a fundamental principle, which is that we tend to remember the last thing we hear. And Google has a whole thing on that. You can go and look it up. But in any event, Google has a lot of things on everything, although ChatGPT would probably help you a little better now. But anyway, and that's another thing we might want to talk about, how that
We
works
should.
and the impact of that. And so what's the last thing they hear? The last thing they hear is the number. And that's what their brain thinks about. And so the conversation becomes about that. But what if you flip that around and you said, Sally and John, it was great to chat with you earlier today. And based on what we said, your responses to all the things we talked about, your investment in working with us over the next year is going to be X, whatever X is. You get it right up. Notice now it's right up front. And then you add some very simple words. And that includes a number of very special things. And then you start talking about about the great things you do, and all of a sudden it becomes about the great things you do, not the amount that you charge. And so what you see, Scott, is that there's no big thing other than committing to do this. That's probably the biggest thing. Oh yeah, I realize I can do different kind of thing. But from there on in, it becomes this sequence of tiny things which become amazing to you because they seem so simple. We didn't have to go to university. We got it at Accounting High, if you see what I mean. So is that making sense, by the way?
It is. It is very much. So you mentioned earlier about it not being about the tools, it being about you, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about a new tool that can make us better all around. And that's, you had mentioned it. You said we should touch on it. That's AI, that's ChatGPT, that's these large language models that a person with that tool by their side has all of a sudden got everything at their fingertips. And it's not like Google was before. When we had Google, that was revolutionary too. That was absolutely revolutionary. And that's the way we thought about it. The internet, the world at your fingertips. This is something totally different.
Totally different.
What is your instinct or thoughts on this? Is it still fairly new?
It's very simple. In fact, I was at a meeting a couple of days ago where they were talking about this. And in the room was an architect, and well, part of the discussion was accuracy and all of that kind of stuff. And the guy said something needs to be said. He actually said, "My human guys are less accurate than the." than the AI. So, but we keep anyway. I'm not going to get into the accuracy thing, but let's just talk about this. It is, in the end, all of this is about the business model. And if, I mean, just what was the way in which we were taught to do it? And the business model was based on time, right? So, you somehow or other, it's valued by time. If that is still your business model, if that is still your business model, then you are in a heap of trouble, because all of a sudden, right? And think about the senior partner right now, or the people at partner level, right? They used to be, and still are, the guys with a whole lot of knowledge, but now there's someone else in the room who can access that far quicker than they can, and use more sources and all of that kind of stuff. So then that position, if you like, needs to be rethought. Let me put it to you that way. Needs to be rethought. And our team members, please don't call them staff. Our team members are now able to access stuff at a rate that I mean, I'm like you, Scott. I'm stunned, absolutely stunned. Like, for example, the other day, January the 31st, my team was saying, "Oh, Paul, you got to do a blog today." And I go, "Oh God, what can I write about January 31st? What can I write about?" And so I go from ChatGPT and I said, "As you know, it's January 31st. What do you think I could write about today?" And it said, "Well, you may remember that it's Daniel Preistly's birthday." It's a friend of mine, Daniel Preistly, who mentors a lot of businesses, and who I mentor. And it said, "And so why don't you do a blog on the value of mentoring?" And I go, huh. And I mean, it is just so there. And now, we don't have to. There was, way back 2 Novembers ago, and ChatGPT came out, we talked about prompt engineering and all of that kind of stuff. But now we just sit and have a conversation.
Yeah.
And that conversation can be, as how should I say it, can be difficult for a human being to get, because as you are conversing, you are rambling. You are going, "Well, actually, come to think of it, it's probably over there." And so a human being listening to you wouldn't have a clue as to what you just said.
Right.
And then, you get it all played back together with some of the answers in a much better way. So, yeah, and by the way, what's also interesting to figure out is that your clients have access to it too. So,
Yeah.
so
We're all on
it's
equal playing field or equal footing if we have that by our side, right? So it's
sure.
a tool that augments everybody's abilities. You may not have even written that blog on the 31st because you couldn't come up with anything, and then it passed you by.
Yeah.
Now it got you started. It pushed you through any kind of writer's block.
Yeah. Well, it's like Ron, as in Ron Baker, talks a lot about a guy we refer to him as Joe Pine. His official name is Joseph Pine III. And Joe wrote a book that I used to talk about. It's a fantastic book, which talked about the experience economy and how you focus on those kind of, creating great experiences and so on and so forth. His new book, surprise, surprise, is called The Transformation Economy. And the moment you think about what you realize is, I have three choices that you tell me which one is you. One, I enhance lives, I change lives, I transform lives. Pick one. And by the way, those of you joining us right now, pick one.
Pick one. Well, we have to go for the top, right? We have to transform
Well, you might
lives.
want to go to the transform, yeah, but it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. Really, it doesn't matter, because that's what you do. And the moment you get that's what you do, changes everything. Think about the value that you create when you think about the fact, or not think about, but you recognize the fact. That's what you do. That's why I think you're heroes. And of course, you've actually been there. You're there every day. It's just that you don't recognize it. You probably recognized it most when we had that thing called the pandemic. And you were doing things for your clients that saved their businesses. And you know that, and I know that. Right? That's what heroes do. And that's who you are. That's exactly who you are. So let's get back to Joseph Payne for a minute. And he's writing the book, by the way, in a very interesting way. He's using a thing called Substack. And what Substack does is it lets us see what he's writing before it's published. So you can go and say, "Oh, that bit you did today, Joe, I think you could have done this kind of thing." It's absolutely fascinating. And last week he was talking about obviously the transformation economy, because that's what the book is all about. And he said something that I've been trying to say, but he said it in a much better way. He said, "What this is all about is letting humanity flourish." And I thought, whoa, that is such a cool thing. Just frame what you do. You listening to us now, and again, thank you for staying and hopefully enjoying this. Just think about that, and think about the transformative effect of thinking about that. Think about the fact that once you do that, you can choose the clients with whom you work. Think about the fact that when you're thinking about the outcomes and you're thinking about the impacts of those outcomes, that you finally can charge what you're really worth. And by the way, that's not in 6-minute units, right?
Right.
It's up here. And I was actually talking with an accountant yesterday, which I seem to do every day, obviously, and so that's not news to you. So he was saying, but if I ask this particular question, which might be something along the lines of, "What does that mean?" Right? And they might say, "Well, I'll do the payroll faster," or whatever they say.
Yeah.
And then what we've got to learn to do is to ask the next question. And the next question is, so help me understand, John, what's the impact of you doing that? What's the impact of you doing that? Well, the impact is that I'd be able to do blah, 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 blah. Oh, wow. Tell me more about that. And all of a sudden, you're moving from simply reporting on history to helping your clients create history, because they just told you what they want that future history to look like. I hope that makes sense.
It makes so much sense. And you have to get there. You have to guide them there and ask them the right questions in order to figure out what that future is that they can create.
Exactly. 100%. You've got a friend of mine does it this way, and he says, what we tend to talk about is moving people from A to B. Yeah. And he said, but when you ask better questions, you actually move them from A to B to C. Does that make sense? So and it's the questions that get you there. Right. And talking about AI, I mean, some of the most amazing stuff that I've seen recently is we're using let's call them bots, although I don't like calling them that, but let's call them that, where they're doing the whole speech thing, and they now, as you well know, got the sort of ability to speak not like this, but as a human being,
Naturally.
and you can,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And we've been working with some people who've been doing tests on this, and they're making outbound calls. And by the way, when the AI makes the call, it's announcing itself as an AI. That's very important to do. And what you discover in the selling process, for example, is seriously, this blows my mind. But then I think about it and I go, oh, well, of course. And it blows my mind in the sense that in large tests now, the bot, let's call it that, the AI, is not surprisingly outselling the human. And then when this absolutely blows my mind. And when you study, why was that? Why did that happen? What you realize, this is so freaky, is that the human actually becomes more human talking to the AI, because the human is no longer the human. It's really weird. Will not tell the truth to the human, but they'll tell the truth to the AI. It's like really. By the way, this is only something I've discovered in the last 36 hours, so I'm still trying to sort of process that. But
So a human talking to a human, they know they're talking to a human, they're more guarded and they're not revealing everything because maybe they feel
correct,
like they're going to get manipulated, or maybe they feel
100%,
like there's another ulterior motives if they're talking to a human. But if the AI reveals itself and says, I am just a computer talking to you, but it sounds like a human, you will be more honest with it, hoping for a more truer feedback loop from that
yeah,
computer,
yeah,
getting more honest answers because you don't feel like the human's going to lie. The machine won't lie to you like you think a human salesperson would.
correct. And that's exactly it. That's what the conclusion that I've come to. And then all of a sudden, I understand what Joe Pine was talking about, which is letting humanity flourish. I got something the other day that is so obvious, and I just didn't realize how obvious it was, because I'm using and working with AI every day, and obviously I want to get the team working in exactly the same way, and I tend to be someone who just sort of goes for it. And what I realized is that you can't just, quote unquote, in a business, in a firm, you can't just use it. You need to have a strategy. You really do need to have a strategy as to how you put this across the team, how you scale that, and so on and so forth, right? In exactly the same way that you have plans for the year. You just can't say, okay, use it. You've got to have some kind of strategy, and just sit back for a second and say, well, okay, what's the implication of this, and what do we actually want it to look like in the final thing? And bear in mind, if you'd have done that 2 years ago, you'd have a totally different strategy than you would have now, because it's never going to be as slow as it was today, right? So it's an ongoing thing, which makes being in an accounting firm one of the most exciting professions. Why? Because unlike many other professions, you are actually enhancing the lives, transforming the lives, changing the lives of, or enriching is another word, by the way, or enriching the lives of the people that you're privileged to serve.
It is the new frontier as
Yes,
an accountant. If you have evolved beyond billing on time,
yes,
if you have evolved,
because the whole flourishing humanity is a really important phrase, right? Because what you think about all of a sudden is that's you, allowing you to flourish, allowing you to be more human with the person you're having the privilege of talking to right now, or talking with. Okay. And does that make sense? And so that just becomes so much more rewarding.
it's enabling and empowering.
And and all of a sudden it allows you to, you really get an understanding to be able to capture the value, and capturing the value is in the transformation, is in the outcome that you bring. And that can be, it's not the sort of caste debate. It's not that. It's just a debate. Well, it's not even a debate anymore. It's about being concerned with the outcomes. It's as simple as that. It is absolutely as simple as that. And how do you find out what those outcomes are? By asking the questions as to what they would like the outcomes to be, and then go beyond, right? So it's A to B, but to C. And just
And
imagine. I
it's
was
something
talking.
so much bigger than just those little tasks that we're doing for the client that some people are currently still charging for. I'm just thinking of compliance and what we typically hang our hats on
Yeah.
and what we have in the past and the things that we've been charging for. You're not changing anybody's future by putting that on your quote unquote proposal, or
Yeah.
it's not a plan for anything. That's just getting the stuff done.
Yeah.
Right.
That's it.
So we have to
And
shift our perspective and start asking those questions. And then it reframes everything within the firm. It
exactly.
reframes the relationship with the client, and it reframes your perspective on what you're doing in life. So then you bring more enthusiasm to it when you're at the party, talking to the
Yeah.
person, and you explain what you do. But when you're explaining that with your team too, it gets your team more invigorated because you're changing lives. And I've seen firms that are doing this, firms that have
Yes.
become B Corps, or firms that have created graphics to show the impact that they're having on their clients and on the world.
Yeah. You got it. You got it.
And that's what your B1, G1 does as well. But
Yeah.
it helps us reframe the things that we were doing.
Yeah. And funnily enough, I was at a B Corp thing here in Brisbane last night, even though I don't live in Brisbane. I'm just just sort of passing through, talking with our B1 G1 members here in Brisbane and in the rest of Australia as well. And this whole thing, just before I went to the meeting last night, I was actually talking with an accountant in Melbourne via Zoom, obviously, and I was looking at her website, and her website talked about 5 things that they do. And I said to her, I can imagine that when a potential existing client comes in, you would say, hello, John, hello, Sally, it's great to be with you. And you go through the small talk. And then you'd say something like, can I just explain the way in which we work with our customers or our clients here? Because it's a really interesting 5-step process that I'd love to get your feeling on. Would that be okay? And I said, it's just a totally different thing. And why would she do that? Answer, because she cares about the outcome, not the input. The moment you flip that, changes everything.
Changes everything in the relationship. Everybody's aligned with those same outcomes.
Yeah.
And both parties win. Everybody wins when those outcomes, when you get there.
Yeah. And you know, going back to that meeting that I talked about in 2007, that was also important from the point of view of thinking about what's the purpose of, and this is different from having a purpose, what's the purpose of the business. And we've talked about, enhancing lives, enriching lives, changing lives, transforming lives, and so on and so forth. But let's talk about you for a minute. Not you, Scott, but you in your car listening to us now, wherever you are, right? And surely to goodness, when you and it's got something to do with intergenerational wealth and all of those sorts of things, and I want to talk about that in just a minute, but just think about this. What fundamentally should your business be about as far as you're concerned? And the answer is, it should bring you joy. I mean, I know that sounds like, happy clappy and everything else, but that's it, right? But think about for the moment what's actually happening. And it's probably bringing you stress. Why is that? And maybe it's because we're not sort of starting the right way and thinking about the outcomes that we're bringing and stuff like that. And that leads me to, if I might, in the same time that I met Ron in 1996, a guy called Steve Jobs had been booted out of Apple, and was the official line, by the way, is he resigned. But anyway, he was booted out, and here he was at Pixar, and he said this. He said, the storyteller is the most powerful person in the world. Now let's ignore the power play on that for a minute. We don't need to get kind of hung up on that. But have a listen to the next words he said, particularly the last 7. He said this: the storyteller, and by the way, who is that? Well, at the moment, it's you, but I'm going to give you another way of thinking about it for a minute, because I don't think you're a storyteller. What I think you are is a story creator. Who are you creating stories for? You're creating stories for your firm, and you're creating brand new stories for the people that you're privileged to serve. So every time I say storyteller, imagine me saying story creator. So, Mr. Jobs, the storyteller sets the vision, the values, and the agenda, and here come the last 7 words, for an entire generation yet to come. Let me run that by you again. The storyteller sets the vision, the values, and the agenda for an entire generation yet to come. For an entire generation yet to come. The moment that you get that, and I so hope you get it, you realize something very important. And what you realize is it's not about you. It's not about you. It's about something much bigger than you. And the moment you get that, then you start to find very, very interesting ways with, all the sorts of things that Scott brings to you. And they're amazing things that really do help you transform lives, including your own.
That was awesome. You're like Mr. Rogers, the way you're telling these stories. You remind me of that. I used to watch a lot of Mr. Rogers,
No
and he
kidding.
was very patient, and he was talking to you, the viewer, the listener, the person in the audience. And he spoke directly to you, and with
Yeah.
his Daniel Tiger and the way he was very calming presence. This is what you're doing for us now at Accounting High. That was
Oh,
dope.
that's so nice. That's so nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It is a future generation, though, that he was talking to and that we are speaking to, or that we're trying to affect or impact. That's how we have to look at it. That's what Jobs was saying, and that's the point of all of this. It's the
Yep.
purpose that's bigger than yourself.
And, you just look at a certain, ever since, I had the privilege of being on this particular journey, there's always been one thing that people say, oh, yeah, well, and the way they said, of course, you can't get good, I cannot say that, ST8, but you can't get good people these days. Well, no, just think about that for me, because I know that you can. I know that you can, because I have the privilege of working with firms that do.
It's an age-old complaint. Everybody's always complained that they can't find good people, and they should be looking in the mirror. Maybe they should
Yeah,
be a better person, and they could find better people.
you got it. Yeah. And maybe you should stand for something bigger than you. Right?
Yeah, yeah. Look beyond the
It is
mirror.
amazing what happens when, I've got a brilliant little video where, some team members are talking about why they came. And it's just incredible to, I happened to burst into this firm, well, not burst, but unannounced. They're a member of Bill and unannounced. And it was in the middle of, get this, the 7-minute morning team meeting,
Mm.
sometimes called the huddle, where they're talking about, okay, so how was yesterday, what are we going to do, and they're having after action reviews and all of those sorts of things. But basically someone's saying, well, this is what I'm working on, and then the next question is, what help do you need? And this is going around the room. It's just a great place to be, and your firm can be a great place to be. And the first thing that we have to get in our head is, why we're here. And it is all about transforming lives. And when we say transforming lives, yes, the lives of the people that you're privileged to serve, but the lives of the people you're privileged to work with. And of course, you and your family as well. That's why this is so, so, so important.
Beautiful. Class dismissed.